So, hi, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Hi.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Ralph Passante. I'm a resident of Old Japan. I grew up here from the early 70s. And with the exception of 15 years that I lived out of state, I have always been a resident of New Jersey, primarily of Bergen County.
Awesome. And how does the LGBT community relate to you?
Well, I'm gay.
Well, there you go.
And there's a start. I came out in 1982, and when I was 17 years old, and I was one of the first out people at Northern Valley Regional High School. I went to Rutgers University from 1983 to 87, and I was the president of the Lesbian Gay Alliance, what was then the Lesbian Gay Alliance, what is now the LGBTQIA um, Alliance, and or Pride, I should say. And I have been very involved in activism for the community since I was 18 years old, which is more years than I care to mention, but in excess of 30. And
I think we're about the same age, so
well, I'm 55, so it's yeah.
51.
Okay.
So-
So so I've been involved in that. I currently sing with the New York City Gay Men's Chorus. I volunteer with Rainbow Cafe. I also am a volunteer CASA, court-appointed special advocate for foster children in Bergen County.
Awesome.
I was specifically recruited for that by Garden State Equality, which was seeking LGBTQ advocates for foster children because there were none. And to date, I am the only LGBTQ advocate in the Bergen CASA office. And I've seen firsthand, not only with my own experiences and anecdotal experiences of friends, but through my volunteer work and my activism, how great the need is. And growing up as a Bergen County kid, I can say there was nothing here except for feathers.
Yeah.
We had feathers in River Edge, and which is why I supported them during the pandemic, because I didn't want to see them close. It's the oldest gay bar in New Jersey now. And when I was a kid, bars were the place to meet people. We didn't have very much else. I remember when the New York City Lesbian Gay Community Center opened, and then when it was renovated, and I remember the change to the building, and Glenny, Gay and Lesbian Youth of New York, which I was part of. Those things were great, but I will say my experience as a kid was tough, because it meant hopping a bus, getting a ride, or borrowing the car from your parents with some kind of an excuse that they would buy so that you could get into the city, get to a gay place, be surrounded by your community, and make it home within a respectable time frame. It was
Mhm.
stressful. It was very stressful. I wish that we had had something in Bergen County. Now, jumping forward 35 years, I can say um, I think there's an even greater need, because kids are coming out younger and younger. When I came out at 17, I was one of the earlier ones. Now kids are coming out at 12, 13. I work in a school district, and as an administrator, and I work with the Pride Club, and I happen to have a position of visibility within the district, and I see, that we have kids coming out in the fifth and sixth grades. And Particularly for trans kids and non-binary kids and non-gender conforming kids, there is still a significant amount of prejudice. Much of that comes from older generations, especially their own families, their parents in particular. Much of it is religion-based, and some of it's culturally based too. And I think that there's a tremendous need to have some kind of center. I'm actually surprised and a little disappointed that Bergen County, being the largest and most populous, I believe, county in the state,
Yeah.
and probably one of the wealthier ones also, does not have some kind of service. You would think that in Hackensack there would be something in the county seat, and there isn't. There isn't.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's certainly not for lack of interest, I think.
So let me ask you, so in these conversations I've been having, people will say that they are services, and why do I assume that we need a center when we have Buddies and we have Rainbow Cafe and we have all these individual pieces um, form and sort of like a loose, resource for the community.
On the
What
subject of buddies, have you spoken with Eric Cabrera?
I work at Buddies.
Oh, okay. So you know
And
Eric.
he
Okay.
was on here, yes, and I work at
That's
Buddies.
how we met. Oh my God, how am I forgetting this, Anthony? Duh, of course you know Eric from there. Duh. Okay, so Eric's always my first thought when we, when somebody starts mentioning, because he's come to Rainbow Cafe a few times. Um, so I think, there's a difference between organizations like Buddies, which really started out as an AIDS service organization and an HIV service organization, which fits a specific need within the community for testing for sex education, for safe sex education especially, and it's an excellent program, but it does not cover the comprehensive scope of services or range of services that is necessary for all members of the community. Things like Rainbow Cafe, which is specifically designed for LGBTQ youth, are wonderful, but they are entirely dependent on local support in terms of volunteers and donations. If Rainbow Cafe weren't hosted by the church in Cresskill, Cresskill Congregational, we would not have a meeting place. We would have to go finding one. And as I mentioned to you before, when the pastor who was the driving force behind establishing Rainbow Cafe was transferred by his bishop to another district because he completed his 7 years, there was no one to take the helm. And that makes it difficult because without someone within the church supporting it, and I'm not saying they don't still, but because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to find out. But without someone taking the helm who has the church and the authority to say we can use this space, we're kind of left without it. Also, by comparison to the LGBTQ centers in New York and LA, both of which I'm very familiar with, and Orange County, California, the comprehensive range of services that's offered includes not just AIDS and HIV counseling, but general therapy counseling and referrals, social groups, 12-step groups, which are specific to the LGBTQ community, which are really, really important in addressing addiction. Because also as a recovering addict, I can say myself, when I started out going to AA meetings when I was in my 20s here in New Jersey, with a bunch of old timers sitting in a circle smoking cigarettes, and there were a bunch of crusty old men, crusty old straight white men. I wasn't getting very far because they could not possibly relate to me and they didn't want to know nothing from my being gay. Okay. So it's very important to have community. There are also social activities. I mean, dances and crafts clubs and literary events and theatrical events and, entertainment, all the kinds of things that people need to be part of a community. For Pride, it would be wonderful to have a center in Hackensack I'm just saying Hackensack because it's the county seat, but somewhere in the county where we could have a Bergen County Pride. We have so many gay people up here and trans people up here, and it's really important for them to have a safe and brave space, especially for our trans folks who are under attack constantly, especially during the past 4 years. They need a place where they can feel safe, where they can call up and say, hey, a 15-year-old kid who says, hey, I'm trans and I don't know what to do and I don't know whom to speak to and I don't know where to go, because those are the kids who are most at risk for homelessness because they get kicked out, for addiction, and for suicide, because the rates on all three of those things are 4 to 5 times higher for LGBTQ youth than they are for their cisgender heterosexual counterparts. And I mean, statistics I've heard, 25% of this country's homeless youth are LGBTQ. 25%. And we surely do not represent 25% of the population. We represent about 3 to 5% of the population. And the reason these kids are homeless is because their parents kick them out. Often it's culturally based, often it's religiously based objections. But whatever it is, they experience rejection from a very early age. And then even taking out, going to the next step, not the kids that are not necessarily at risk for very severe consequences like that. The fact that 90+% of LGBTQ kids experience bullying in school, and we've seen where that can lead. And simply the fact that they don't have representation. We have just now in Bergen County, in New Jersey in general, rather, I should say, started teaching LGBTQ history in school curriculum. That was signed into law by Governor Murphy last year and is now a mandatory part. And it's not an opt-out, meaning that parents cannot choose to not have their children learn it. It's required in the education. But I can say, as someone who works in the field, that many educators haven't the faintest clue how to teach it. They're looking for guidance. It would be ideal, and we've been fortunate to have Garden State Equality helping us with that. But they're looking for guidance. They're looking for resources. Pride clubs and gender sexuality or alliances, what we used to call gay straight alliances, but now GSAs, are looking for something, someplace local that GLSEN, the national organization, can use for referrals. And it's pretty sad when you tell a 15-year-old kid in Bergen County, sorry, you're going to have to go down to Asbury Park to go to Garden State Equality, or you're going to have to go to New York City to find your community because we don't have anything here for you. And how is that 15-year-old kid supposed to get somewhere?
Yeah.
Same thing with senior citizens. Rapidly approaching those days, I'll say for myself, you don't want to have to go an hour away or 2 hours away to be able to find something that's going to work. You want something close by. And there are a lot of people who would be very willing, I think, to donate time and money to that type of effort, if only it were close enough to home that it wouldn't be a major hassle to get there.
Thank you. Like, everything you're saying is like in my head constantly. It's so good to hear someone else say it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just we are still one of the things I think that people tend to forget, and they need to speak to people our age to understand it, Anthony, is that prior to marriage equality, there was a whole range of things going on. I was 50 years old when marriage equality happened. Okay, I lived, presumably more than half of my life without the right to marry the person of my choice. It's only last year that we finally had a Supreme Court decision that makes it unlawful for someone to fire someone from a job just because they're LGBTQ. I mean, 2020 it took before that basic right to hold your job and be who you are was ratified.
Yeah.
And there are still a lot of things that we have to fight for: parenting rights, and a lot of other discrimination that still goes on. I mean, we're under attack in many places. There are many places, and again, often from the religious right. That's the sad part. And one of the things that needs to happen, I think, is for there to be some sort of a bridge between religious communities and the LGBTQ community, because religion's not going to go away, and we're certainly not going to go away. And there needs to be some sort of meeting of the minds there. And that's another thing that a community center can provide. I mean, Temple, what is it? Beth Simchat Torah in New York City worked with the Lesbian Gay Center on 13th Street for many years. And I believe they still do, to provide services to the Jewish LGBTQ community. I would love to see that with other things, so that there wouldn't always have to be this divisiveness between.
Yeah, and there is a lot of churches in New Jersey that are doing that,
Right.
and there's there are bits and pieces of things that are being done, but the fact that there's no place where all this lives, no one
Right.
knows about it. And so all those past fears and all those, beliefs is
Mhm.
what people feel. So if you go around and talk to people and say, "Hey, is there any kind of services?" They're going to say no, because there's
Right.
no one sitting there saying, "Okay, well, this is what's available," and
And I'll tell you what, when you say to me before, well, there are, people tell you there are services available. My response to that would be, what? Where? Really? I've been
really,
a Bergen County resident since I was, uh, 6 months old. I was born in Jersey City, but I lived in Bergen County since I was 6 months old.
yeah,
And to my knowledge, there have never been any services to speak of. There are the occasional organizations like Buddies, for instance, that have popped up. And Buddies is relatively a new organization in terms of my life, anyway. And I was very glad to see it. When I was at college in New Brunswick, I worked with. That was when AIDS first made its appearance, and we did a lot of work with AIDS service organizations in trying to do education and safe sex and prevention and advocacy, which was desperately needed. And if anybody has any questions about that, all I can say to them is, if you see how quickly a vaccine rather, was developed for the coronavirus, for COVID-19, in roughly a year, and not even a year, it was actually out in 9 months. And HIV has been around for 30 plus years, and we still don't have anything. The closest we have are blockers like PrEP,
yeah,
which can help significantly, but it took 20 odd years for those to be developed. And that's directly because the community that was most at risk was not mainstream and was still subject to discrimination. That is it. And, and
act up.
unavoidable part of that discrimination, that discussion is discrimination. And that's so when we talk about what we need in Bergen County, there should be one home for these places. There should be one place, because that's the first thing. When somebody, I've had friends call me. A friend called me recently, a friend of mine from California. Her husband um, has come out as trans. Okay, they've been married 10 years, and they are both in their 60s. Okay, and her husband came out as trans, and she's fully supportive, but she didn't know where to go to get support services. And just like with many other people, with many younger people, he has been suicidal, suicidally depressed, suicidal ideation, severe depression, because he doesn't see a clear path towards living his authentic life, because he doesn't know where to turn. He doesn't know what services. And the part of the country that they live in, they no longer live in California, but the part of the country that they live in doesn't have. And my first thought was, LGBTQ center, go to the LGBTQ center in the nearest large city. Well, the nearest large city is 3 hours away from them, and I don't want to see that here. There's no excuse for that in New Jersey. New Jersey is a well organized, overall democratic and fairly progressive and wealthy state. There is absolutely no excuse, and especially in Bergen County, although Bergen County certainly has its red leanings, there is just no excuse for us not having that type of service here anymore. Really, really, there isn't.
Yeah,
That's really what it comes down to.
absolutely. Wow. You just like brought everything out. You just everything I can say to that. I literally have
And
nothing
hand
to
me a microphone and a platform, Anthony, and you will hear it.
say. And oh my God, thank God for you. And thank God for, because I know you work, I met you at Rainbow Cafe, and um that opened my eyes a lot going there. I remember speaking to some young people there, and there
Mhm.
was one particular one and who was being bullied, and they were at the age of my daughter, who's 10. So like 10 or 11, and this, you can see the fear, and this child,
Right,
this 10 or 11 is a child, doesn't quite understand what it means to be a
right,
lesbian, doesn't quite understand sex, doesn't quite understand all these things, but
right,
is people projecting that onto this child, saying, kill yourself, throwing garbage on, and all horrific things.
Right.
And
And the kid you spoke to by us was probably 12 or 13, because
yeah,
that's as young as Rainbow Cafe goes.
yeah,
And as a matter of fact, most of our kids, we might have had a 13-year-old, but most of our kids were between 14 and 17.
yeah,
And at that age, it's painful enough. For a younger child, it would be
yeah,
really devastating, because they, as you say, they fully don't understand, or they
yeah,
don't fully understand, I should say, they don't fully understand, um, why they're being discriminated against. They know how they feel, they know who they are, and what's baffling to them is why people would reject them for that. And that's an incredibly painful lesson for an 11 or 12-year-old child
yeah,
to have to learn. It's an incredibly painful lesson even for an adult to have to learn.
exactly.
But when you're in your formative years, it can be scarring,
Yeah,
and
and
traumatic, and
and
that trauma can last for a lifetime.
and the work that you guys were doing is so important. It's so important and needed. And like you said, this is just dependent on people who are going to give donations and support it within that local church. And
Right,
like, why is anyone seeing that this should be made, mandatory throughout the entire county? They should have everyone should be doing this because no child should deserves that,
right,
and it's just it really broke my heart, to see that and how difficult that is. That's not an easy thing to do with children that are suffering that way, to open them up time
right,
after time and support them.
right,
That's not an easy thing. It's not like, okay, here's a place and, oh, they flourish, you know?
right.
Um, so God bless you, and this is coming from an atheist. You know what I mean?
I am too, Anthony. I am too, an avowed atheist. And let me tell you, happier as an atheist
Yeah.
than I ever was as a Catholic, because you know, uh, without bashing the church, which I could easily do, I will simply say that being told as a teenager that I was going to go to hell, because I was gay, was appalling. I didn't truly believe it, because I already at that point had questions, and we also know, the you know charming history of the Catholic Church with regard to sexual assault,
Yeah.
of children. I mean, it's disgraceful. It's disgraceful. The hypocrisy within it is what really bothers me. But I will say that, and that even, not the assault, but the attitude, the hypocrisy of the Catholic Church pales in comparison to some of the evangelical faiths, where, I mean, they'll just cast you out. And if you've been raised in, rural Oklahoma, with a church that is the center of your town and the center of your belief system, and then they kick you out and tell your parents to throw you out because you're gay and you're a sinner and you're going to hell and you're a demon and all of this other crap, what does that do to a 16-year-old?
Yeah.
And then they want, you wonder why that 16-year-old ends up on the streets of LA, selling their body for sex so that they have money, and doing drugs so that they never fall asleep, so that they can protect their possessions, and this is what happens to these kids.
Yeah.
It's disgraceful. It's disgraceful.
Yeah. Absolutely. So this is the point where I just ask you if you have any questions for me towards this, or if you want to add anything to this, if there's any.
No, no, I mean, I certainly expressed myself. And and I'm happy to do so again. If you would like, I would be happy to reach out to Valerie Faneri,
Yeah,
and see if she would
anyone.
support this type of idea. But I
Yeah.
think my suggestion to you would be, if this is something you really want to put together, I would uh, I would have a proposal, and some people involved that are prepared
Well,
to.
let's talk offline about this.
Okay, right.
For this recording, I just want to make sure that you know that this is being recorded and that you give
Right.
consent, and it's going to be made public at some point. Uh,
Okay.
and also to let you know that if at any point you were saying, "Hey, I don't want this," take it down. I will do so. Just give me enough time to do that.
Yeah. No,
And
I'm fine with what I've said. I mean,
you feel comfortable with everything.
I'm not specifying names,
Yeah,
other than Valerie, who I know would be supportive and,
yeah,
is in a position to at least advocate. But I certainly would be interested in helping out with
yeah,
that kind
yeah, yeah. So
of
I'm
idea.
I'm gonna end the recording if you wanna say goodbye, and then we can continue our conversation.
Okay.